Jae-min is 34 years old, one of Seoul's most decorated surgeons. He doesn't believe in love, because the last time he let a woman close enough to matter, she emptied his accounts and walked down the aisle with another man. He hasn't spoken about it since. He doesn't need to. The operating room gave him something better than love. It gave him control. Ingrid Davis believes in people, or she used to. She is a Black American woman living alone in Seoul. She was engaged once. She was pregnant once. She found out about her fiancé and her cousin the same week she found out about the baby, and she made a decision that broke her in ways she still hasn't finished counting. She kept the child, and that began the story of these two broken souls. Welcome to Afro-Soul Romance TV, besties. Please like and subscribe. It started 5 years ago, on the worst night of both their lives. Jae-min was finishing a consultation when the doors flew open. A woman, black, late 20s, alone. She was 33 weeks pregnant and hemorrhaging, and the way the paramedics were moving told him everything he needed to know before he'd even read a single number. He stepped in. What's her pressure? 80/50, and dropping. She was found in her apartment by a neighbor, alone. Alone, he pulled on gloves without breaking stride. The woman on the gurney was conscious, barely, and her eyes found his with the particular desperation of someone who knows they are running out of time and is not ready. He had seen that look hundreds of times. It never got smaller. "I need you to stay with me," he said. Not warm, not cold, precise. She grabbed his wrist. "What about my baby? I'm going to take care of you. Both of you. Stay with me." They moved fast. A nurse peeled away to make calls. Family, emergency contacts, the father, if there was one listed. Jae-min was already reading the monitors, already calculating, already building the map of everything that needed to happen in the next 4 minutes if this woman was going to survive. The nurse reappeared at his shoulder. "Doctor, I reached the contact listed as the baby's father." "What did he say?" A pause that lasted too long. "He said," she lowered her voice, "he said the child probably isn't his." The room kept moving. Monitors beeped. The team worked. Jae-min did not stop moving, did not change his expression, mind, did not let a single thing show on his face, because he was a surgeon, and the table was the only place that had ever asked him to be exactly who he was. But something happened behind his eyes. He finished the instruction he was giving. He crossed to the corridor. He picked up the phone himself, and he dialed the number in the file, and a man answered on the third ring with the loose, careless voice of someone who had already decided none of this was his problem. "The woman you're listed as emergency contact for is in critical condition," Jae-min said. "She may not survive the night. I need you here." A pause. "Look, I already told your nurse the kid's probably not even mine. I don't care whatever happens, just stop bothering my night." Jae-min hung up. He stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds. In 5 years of surgery, he had held dying people together with his bare hands, and never once felt what he felt in those 4 seconds. A specific, white-hot fury that had nothing to do with medicine. Then he walked back into the room, and he fought for her, like she was the only person left on earth. She was losing blood faster than they could replace it. The baby's heart rate dropped, then dropped again. Jae-min's hands moved with the kind of focus that other doctors described later in hushed tones. Not because it was flashy, but because it was absolute. Every decision was correct. Every second was accounted for. It wasn't enough. The baby didn't make it. And in the last conscious moment before the anesthesia pulled her under for the emergency surgery that would save her life, she turned her face toward him and she whispered something so quietly that the nurses didn't catch it. He did. "Please, save my baby." He saved her instead. It was all he had left to give. When he scrubbed out 2 hours later, the wing had gone quiet again. A junior resident said something to him, probably congratulations, probably the right words, and Jae-min nodded and walked to the end of the corridor and stood at the window and looked at the city for a long time. He didn't know her name yet. He'd been too busy keeping her alive to read it properly. He found out later it was Ingrid Davis, And then he went home, and he told himself that was the end of it. He almost believed that for 5 years. 5 years is long enough to rebuild a life. Ingrid did it methodically, the way she did everything. Step by step, with her jaw set, and her grief packed, somewhere she didn't visit often. She finished her grief counseling. She got her qualifications. She applied for a postgraduate administrative program attached to a hospital in Seoul, and when she read the name of the hospital in the acceptance letter, she went very still. Seoul General. She sat with that for 3 days, told herself it was just a building, told herself the hospital had nothing to do with the night she'd spent inside it, unconscious and broken, waking up to a ceiling she didn't recognize, and an absence she would spend years learning to carry. She told herself she was healed enough. She took the position. She was wrong about being healed enough, but she took it anyway, because the alternative was letting fear make her decisions, and she had promised herself she was done with that. Jae-min was in his office, reviewing surgical files, when his assistant placed a new employee orientation pack on his desk. He barely glanced at it, then his eye caught a name, Ingrid Davis. He went very still. He picked up the file, read it, set it down, read it again. The photograph confirmed what some part of him already knew, because a face like that, seen in the worst possible moment, does not leave you. He was standing at the nurse's station the next morning when she came through the main corridor. She was dressed professionally, carrying a tablet, speaking to someone from HR. She looked like a woman who had put herself back together piece by piece and decided the seams were nobody's business. She didn't recognize him. Of course she didn't. He'd been masked, gloved, gowned. She had been barely conscious. To her, he was a stranger in a white coat with a name badge she hadn't learned yet. To him, she was the woman he'd stood over at 2 a.m. while the world fell apart around her. He said nothing. He watched her move down the corridor, and then he went back to his files. And he told himself, this didn't change anything. He noticed the next morning that she rerouted her walk. The maternity ward was between the admin office and the cafeteria, and she took the long way around, without ever explaining why, avoiding the maternity ward, probably trying to not face her fears. Then he noticed it again the second day too, and the third. He said nothing, but something old and carefully buried started to move. It was a Wednesday, when everything shifted in a way neither of them could have predicted. Jae-min was 40 minutes into a surgery that had stopped cooperating. The bleeding was wrong, the field was wrong, his registrar was good but not good enough for this, and the silence in the theatre had taken on the specific texture of a room where everyone is too afraid to say they're afraid. Outside in the coordination corridor, Ingrid was running logistics. She had no reason to be watching the theatre window, but she stopped and watched anyway. She saw the pause he made, just 2 seconds. The kind of pause nobody outside that room would have caught. But she'd been watching people carry pressure for years, and she knew exactly what she was looking at. She stepped to the intercom. Dr. Jae-min. He doesn't respond, but she knows he can hear her. You're the best doctor here. The patient needs you. 4 more seconds of silence, then his hands move again, and the fracture seals. He finished the surgery without another hesitation. He walked past her afterward, without saying a word. She didn't expect one. She went back to her tablet and her files, and told herself it meant nothing. He went to his office and sat down, and didn't open a single file for 11 minutes. 3 weeks later, late on a Tuesday evening, he was taking the corridor past the pediatric ward when he saw her. She had her back against the wall. Her arms were crossed over her chest. Her face was turned toward the ceiling, and she was crying in that precise, controlled way, quietly. He stopped. He could have kept walking. He could have found an excuse, a file, a phone call, a direction he suddenly needed to be going. He stood there for a moment, and then he crossed the corridor and sat down against the wall beside her, not close enough to crowd her, close enough that she'd know it was intentional. She didn't look at him. I don't need anything, she said. I know, he said. They sat there for a while, in the half-lit corridor. Neither of them spoke. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. Eventually, her breathing evened out. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded once and didn't say anything else, because sometimes the kindest thing you can offer a person is the absence of a question. But neither of them moved right away, and the silence between them had a quality to it that neither of them were ready to name. She didn't know yet. She had no idea, but she was about to find out, and nothing after that would be the same. A few days later, she found the file that changed everything. She reads her own name, her old address, her blood type, the date, 3:47 a.m. She reads the clinical description of that night in language that is stripped of all emotion, and the stripping makes it worse somehow. She reads the attending surgeon's name at the bottom of the report, Dr. Jamin. She sits with that for a very long time. The office was empty. The building was mostly quiet. She closes the file. She opens it again. She closes it. She puts both hands flat on the desk and stares at the wall and does the breathing exercise the therapist taught her in the first year, the one she doesn't need anymore, except apparently she needs it right now. Then she stands up. Then she goes to find him. He is in his office, when she knocks once, clearly not the knock of someone who needs permission. "Come in." She opens the door and stands in the frame. She doesn't come in all the way. Her eyes are dry, which has cost her something. "You were there." He looks up from his desk. He looks at her face, and he knows exactly what she's talking about, and he doesn't pretend otherwise. "The night everything happened." Her voice is steady. "You were the surgeon." Yes, one word, no defense, no explanation, no redirection, just the flat truth of it, offered without armor. She steps inside. She closes the door. "Why didn't you say anything when I started here? You knew. You've known this whole time. What would I have said?" She opens her mouth and closes it again. "I don't know, something. You came here to work," he says. "You had already survived that night. I didn't want to be the person who made you relive it in a hallway." The silence that follows is not empty. It is dense with things neither of them has words for yet. She sits down across from him. He waits. "Did you know," she asks, "that he wasn't coming?" "Yes." "When did you know?" "Before you did." She exhales. It is a long breath, the kind you take when you've been holding it for longer than one conversation. "What did he say exactly? The man who—" She stops, starts again. "What did he actually say?" "He laughed," Jamin says simply. "And then he said the child probably wasn't his." She doesn't react visibly. She's had 5 years to imagine that call. The reality is almost easier than the imagination. Almost. "I'm sorry," he says. She looks at him sharply. Not offended, just surprised. For what? You saved my life." "I know," he says. "I'm still sorry. They didn't plan what happened next. It simply became routine. Some nights, it's the break room at 11 p.m., the hospital quiet around them, bad vending machine coffee going cold on the table between them. Some nights, it's the courtyard where the benches are damp from evening rain and the city hum is low and almost peaceful. They talk the way people talk when they have stopped performing wellness. "His name was Derek," she says one night. "We'd been together 4 years. I planned everything about my life around him. My cousin was at our engagement party. She gave a speech. She cried during it." Another pause, and her voice stays level, which is the most devastating version of what she's describing. "I found out about them 3 weeks before the wedding. I went to meet her, and I found them together in her apartment." "What did you do?" "I closed the door." She looks at the courtyard wall. "I didn't even fight. I just closed the door and drove home and sat in my car for about 3 hours, trying to figure out how many of the last 4 years were real." "How many were?" She almost smiles. "The dog was real. We had a dog." She picks up her coffee cup and puts it down without drinking. "I was 8 weeks pregnant when I found out. I decided to keep the baby. I decided that whatever he was, whatever she was, that child was mine, and I was keeping it. And then I lost it anyway. In a hospital in Seoul, where I didn't speak enough of the language, and the one person I called didn't answer, and she stops. He doesn't fill the silence. "I just thought," she says, finally quietly, That some things you're supposed to get to keep. He looks at her. Yes, he says. You're supposed to. She looks back at him. Okay, your turn. He turns the cup in his hands slowly. Her name was Soo-yeon. We met during my residency. I thought she was the most honest person I'd ever met, which tells you something about how good she was at lying. He says it without bitterness, which is almost worse than bitterness. 3 years. She never loved me. I know that now. I was a specific kind of useful, a surgeon with good prospects, and a family that asks few questions. She took money in amounts small enough I didn't notice. She was planning her wedding to another man for the last 8 months we were together. How did you find out? Wedding invitation. A mutual acquaintance, not knowing, handed it to me at a conference. He pauses. Our names were both on the past, mine and his. She had apparently told people we were close friends of hers. Ingrid stares at him. She put your name on the invitation. Yes. That is, she breathes, that is a specific kind of evil. Yes. What did you do with it? I went back to my hotel room, he says. And I sat very still for a very long time, and then I made a decision. What decision? He looks at her. That I would never do any of this again. She holds his gaze. Yeah, she says softly. I made that same decision. I know. We're both very smart people. Yes. And completely alone. Yes. Neither of them laughs. Neither of them looks away. I will never love again, she says, and she means it with everything she has. Neither will I, he says. I and the word sits in the courtyard air between them, like something that has already decided it's a lie. They stay out there for another hour. They don't touch. They don't say anything else that matters out loud. But when Ingrid finally stands to go inside, and Jaemin stands with her, they are closer than they were yesterday. And tomorrow they will be closer still. And neither of them is thinking about anything except the other person's face, which is exactly where the real danger begins. The first sign that something has changed is that Jaemin starts using her last name, not in a formal document way, in a deliberate way, the kind of deliberateness that only exists when someone is seriously putting in the work to cause distance and hoping nobody notices the effort. Ms. Davis, he'll say, clear, clipped, professional. Ingrid notices immediately. She is too smart not to. She also notices that he has started taking a different route to the surgical wing, one that does not pass her office. And that when they do end up in the same room, his eye contact lasts exactly as long as required and not 1 second longer. She responds in kind. They visibly start to avoid each other the best way they could, silently keeping to their vow they've made never to fall in love, and the other party wasn't going to make them change that. Within a week, she has volunteered for every administrative shift that buries her in the records office by 7 a.m. and keeps her there until 4. A schedule that neatly brackets the hours he is most likely to be in the corridors. She tells herself it's because there's a lot of work to do, but that's not why, and the hospital did not believe it for a single second. You know, her colleague Priya says, one afternoon, dropping a stack of folders on Ingrid's desk and leaning against the doorframe with the relaxed energy of someone who has absolutely nothing better to do. The two of you would be a lot more convincing if you were slightly less obvious about it. Ingrid doesn't look up. About what? About the whole. Priya waves a hand. Elaborate performance of not being in love with each other. I'm not. Ingrid looks up. I'm not doing a performance. You changed your lunch schedule. I wasn't hungry at noon. You changed it back when you realized he eats at 1 o'clock now. Ingrid stares at her. I changed it back because noon actually works better for. And he booked the small conference room to review charts every Tuesday, which he never did before. Except you use that corridor on Tuesdays, which you would only know if Priya, yes? Go do your work. Priya picks up her folders with the satisfied expression of someone who has already won. The nurses have a betting pool, just so you know. She pauses at the door. I bet on March. Ingrid throws a pen cap at the door as it closes. Down the hall in the surgical wing, Jaemini is having essentially the same conversation with his fellow attending Dr. Hahn, except it is less words and more silences with meaning, which is the male hospital version of the same conversation. The new administrator, Han says with no preamble, looking at a patient chart he is not actually reading. Jamie doesn't answer. The American. I know who you mean. I'm just saying, Han says, turning a page he also doesn't read, that you've been operating on 40 minutes less sleep per night since she started here, which means something is keeping you awake. Which means, are you going to make a point? Han looks at him, looks back at the chart. You seem more human lately, that's all. He says it with zero sentimentality, the way men at hospitals deliver compliments, wrapped in a clinical observation, no return address. Jamie says nothing. Han flips one more page. Her first week here, you answered her department email within 4 minutes. The hospital director waits 3 days. I was at my desk. You're always at your desk. You've never replied to mine in under 24 hours. Han stands, tucks the chart under his arm, and walks out. At the door. March is too soon. I'd give it to April. The door closes. Jamie stares at the wall. He is not in love. He is not. He is a man who processes things carefully, and what he is experiencing is residual emotional response to a significant shared history. That is different from love. It is categorically different. He picks up his coffee. It has been cold for an hour. He drinks it anyway. The problem with avoiding someone in a hospital is that hospitals are built around emergencies, and emergencies don't respect anyone's rerouted schedule. It was a Friday. Ingrid was in the administrative corridor, finalizing a compliance submission that was already 20 minutes past deadline when she heard footsteps behind her that she'd apparently become very good at recognizing without meaning to. She kept her eyes on her tablet. The Kang family consent forms need a secondary admin signature, Jamie said. I'll process them this afternoon. They're scheduled for this morning. She turned. He was standing at a professional distance, white coat, unreachable expression, looking at her in that way he had, like she was something he was trying to diagnose from a careful remove. She looked back at him with the same energy. I'll move them up, she said. Thank you. He didn't leave. She looked back at her tablet. Was there something else? A pause. No, he said. He left. She stared at her screen for a full 10 seconds without reading a word. Down the corridor, he walked back to the surgical wing, took the stairs instead of the lift for no reason he was willing to examine, and told himself this was fine. Everything was fine. He was a professional. He was losing. Derek showed up on a Wednesday, which in retrospect is exactly the kind of day Derek would pick. Ingrid is walking back from a meeting near the administrative offices, slightly late, carrying 2 folders and a coffee she hasn't had a chance to drink, when she hears her name in a voice she has spent 5 years successfully not hearing. Ingrid! She stops. He is standing near the building entrance looking like himself, which is the problem. He always looked like someone trustworthy, well-dressed, practiced expression of regret, the kind that's been rehearsed enough to develop good posture. I heard you were here, Derek says, moving toward her. I had to see you. You look beau. No, she says. He blinks, pauses. He clearly had a next sentence planned, and her interruption has displaced it. I just want to talk. Derek. Her voice is calm, the way cold water is calm. Whatever you've heard about this hospital, or this position, I want you to recompute whatever math you came here to do, and then leave. It's not about that. I've changed. I've been trying to reach you for... You haven't changed, she says. You've updated your approach. Those are different things. He steps closer. And something about that step, the familiarity of it, the assumption embedded in it, does something to her breathing. Ingrid, listen. What happened with your cousin? What happened with my cousin, she says quietly, is that you slept with her, and I was pregnant. You don't get to give that event a gentler name. He opened his mouth to respond. Then a voice arrives from 3 meters to the left, and it is so flat and so cold, it actually stops time. Is there a problem here? Jamie is walking toward them at the pace of someone who has already decided the outcome. He is not moving fast. He doesn't need to. He is reading the entire scene. Ingrid's rigid shoulders, Derek's invasive proximity, the folders held slightly too tight, and by the time he reaches, He has already made a series of decisions about how this ends. He looks at Derek with the exact expression he uses when residents explain confidently why they did something wrong. "Who are you?" Derek asks, which is brave and stupid in equal measure. Jamie doesn't answer that question. He pivots directly to what matters. 5 years ago, he says, his voice quiet and factual, or like he is presenting findings at a conference, "You received a call from this hospital informing you that a woman was hemorrhaging in our emergency wing. You laughed. You said the child was probably not yours, and you hung up." The color shifts in Derek's face. "I was the surgeon on duty that night." Jamie takes one more step forward. "I held that phone. I made that call. I watched what your decision cost someone." He pauses. "You don't get to stand near her again. There are 3 nurses and an administrative resident in the immediate corridor. Nobody moves. Nobody pretends to be doing something else." Derek looks at Ingrid. His rehearsed regret has entirely vacated his expression. "Ingrid, go," she says. He looked at Ingrid, at the way she was standing, at the expression on her face, and whatever he'd been planning to say dissolved. He straightened his jacket, performed a small wounded dignity, and walked away. The corridor holds its silence for a few seconds after. Then a phone rings somewhere, and a nurse coughs, and the world begins moving again, like a tape unpressed. Ingrid stands in the hallway and doesn't speak. She is feeling something she had genuinely forgotten was possible. Not gratitude, something more structural than that. The feeling of someone stepping into your corner without being asked and meaning every word of it. Not performing defense, performing nothing, just standing there between her and the thing that hurt her. She turns to look at him. He is already looking at her. "Thank you," she says. "Yes," he says, which is not a normal response to thank you, but it lands correctly. He walks away first. She watches him go, and she stops pretending she doesn't know what this is. She finds him that night in the courtyard. He is sitting on the bench farthest from the entrance, which is the one he always picks, and he has no coffee, which means he has been there long enough to finish it. He looks up when she walks over, and there is something in his face that is not quite prepared. Not vulnerable exactly, but not fully armored either. She sits across from him. She doesn't ease into it. "I need to understand something." Waits. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" She says everything, but her voice is quieter than usual. "Because I need to know if it's guilt from that night, or pity, or..." "It's not pity," he says. "It has never been pity." "Then what is it?" He is quiet. Not the evasive quiet, the honest labor quiet, where someone is building a sentence carefully because it carries weight, and they don't want to drop it. "Because I watched you fight death, and then I watched you come back here, to the exact place where you lost everything, and do the work, and learn the building, and take the long way around the maternity ward, and never once ask anyone to feel sorry for you." He paused. "You chose to live, Ingrid, every single day, and I don't know when that stopped being something I was just observing and started being something I could." He stopped. She waited. "Something you want," she said softly. "Something I needed to be near." The courtyard was very quiet. She looked at her hands. "I've been rerouting my schedule for 3 weeks." "I know, but so have I. How is that working for you?" He looked at her. "Poorly." She laughed, a short, real sound, unguarded, the kind of laugh that only comes out when someone's defenses have are. He looked at her when she laughed, and something happened in his expression that he didn't fully catch in time. She caught it. "I'm scared," she said simply. Like saying it out loud was the bravest thing, and she'd decided to do it anyway. "So am I." "You don't act scared." "I act controlled," he said. "They're not the same thing." She looked at him for a moment. "You said that back to me. You said it first. You were right." She was quiet. Then she said, "I really am terrified. I know. Of this. Of whatever this is. I made myself a promise. I made myself the same promise. And," he looks at her, "I think we were both wrong." She broke down and cried a little, and he hands her the sleeve of his coat because there's nothing else available, and they are both aware that this is a slightly absurd gesture, and it helps somehow that they can both see that. "I need it to be slow," she says. "I need us to be careful." "Slow," he agrees immediately. "You can't be formal with me, and then show up and dismantle my ex-fiancé in a hospital corridor, and then act like we're colleagues. I know. That is not slow. I know. I'm sorry." A pause. "He shouldn't have been that close to you." "He shouldn't have," she agrees. "And then, despite everything, the way you said it, you don't get to stand near her again." She looks at her hands. "I didn't know I needed someone to say that. I didn't know that was something I was waiting for. You weren't supposed to wait for it. It should have been obvious long ago that you were worth defending." She looks up at him quickly. He is not performing the line. He is just saying it, like a fact, with the same tone he'd use for a clinical result. She looks away before he can see her face do the thing it's doing. "Okay," she says quietly. "Okay." Slow. Slow is 3 weeks of coffee that gradually gets shared instead of separate. Slow is walking to the car park together without naming it a ritual. Slow is one afternoon when his hand brushes hers, reaching for the same door, and neither of them addresses it, but neither moves away, either. Slow is not without pain. There is a Tuesday, unremarkable Tuesday, grey sky, or normal workload, when she comes into the break room and he is briefing a young resident on a pediatric case, and something about the words used triggers something in her that she didn't see coming, and she sets her coffee down and walks out without a word. He finishes the briefing in 4 minutes. He finds her in the stairwell. "Talk to me," he says. "I'm fine. You don't have to be fine." "I know I don't have to." She stops, presses the back of her hand to her mouth for a second. Then, "I just forget sometimes that it still lives in me. I go weeks being completely fine, and then something just clips it. I know. I don't want it to clip things between us. I don't want to be fragile in this. Ingrid." He says her name the way he said "I hear you" on that operating table 5 years ago, grounded and present, and fully meaning it. "You are the least fragile person I have ever met. You are having a moment. Those are different." She inhales, nods, doesn't quite meet his eyes. "Can I show you something?" he says. She looks up. He walks her to the maternity wing. She knows where they're going about halfway there, and her steps slow slightly but don't stop. He doesn't take her hand and doesn't guide her. He just walks beside her at her pace, close enough that their arms nearly touch. The corridor outside the delivery suite is quiet at this hour. Pale lights, the distant sound of a monitor somewhere. She stops outside the room where it happened and stares at the door and says nothing for a long time. He stands beside her. "I've never come back here," she says. "I know. I didn't think I could. You're here." She is. She is standing right here, all in the spot that has lived in her chest like a stone for 5 years, and she is not collapsing. She is not fine. She is quietly and completely breaking, and also somehow still standing, which is the most honest version of strength. He doesn't try to fix it. He doesn't say it gets easier, or that she should feel anything specific. He just stays. After a while, she reaches over and finds his hand. He holds it without comment, without ceremony. They stand there until she's ready to leave, and when she turns away from the door, her face is different, not healed, not closed, just settled, like something that was fighting for space in her chest has finally been given its room. "Thank you," she says. "You don't have to keep thanking me. I know." She says, "But I want to." One evening in the courtyard, weeks later, the warm enough now that they've stopped bringing extra layers. "Tell me what you actually lost when Seo Yun left," she says. He pauses. "What do you mean?" "I told you. You told me what she took. That's different." She holds his gaze. "What did you lose?" He is quiet for a long time. "The ability to believe," he says slowly. "That someone could choose me without an agenda. That I was worth choosing. Genuinely. For no functional reason." He says it with the precision of someone who has finally located the correct word. "I stopped believing I was someone people would want because of who I was, not what I could provide." She nods. "That's it," she says. "That's what she actually took." Yes, I want you to know something, Ingrid says. I am here because of who you are, the way you sat on a hospital floor with me and didn't ask questions, the way you defended me without being asked, the way you said I hear you to a woman who had nobody left in the room. She pauses. I chose you before I even knew I was choosing, and it had nothing to do with what you have or what you do. It was just you. He doesn't say anything, but she watches something in him. Some guarded, calcified thing he built after Seoul develop a crack, not shattering, just fracturing, the way a sealed window fractures before it finally opens. He reaches over and tucks a strand of her hair back, quietly and without announcement. April, he says. She blinks. What? There was a betting pool among the staff. He says it without expression. About us. She stares at him for 1 second. Then she laughs. A real one, the kind that reaches every part of her face, the kind she doesn't control. And he watches her laugh, and the fracture in him opens a little wider. Years have a way of passing differently when you stop spending them alone. They got married quietly, not small, not private necessarily, just quiet in character, the people they trust, the peace they have built. Priya cried more than anyone, and then absolutely denied it. Dr. Hahn makes a toast that is 3 sentences long and contains a compliment so deeply embedded in clinical language that only Jae-min finds it, and his face does something imperceptible that Ingrid clocks from across the room and filed away with the rest of the small, irreplaceable things. They don't honeymoon immediately because there's a critical patient, and she knows before he says it, and has already adjusted the plan. And he looks at her with a specific expression he has never used on another person in his life. They go 2 months later. It is perfect. She brings it up on a Sunday morning, quietly, in the kitchen, in the middle of making tea. I've been thinking, she says, about trying again, having a baby. He went still, like the very first time he saw her name on a file. He didn't speak. I know you've never pushed for it, or asked, or even hinted. She turns around. So I want you to know this is mine, this decision. I'm not doing it because I feel like I should, or because you need it. Ingrid, I feel safe, she says. That's why, for the first time in a long time, I feel genuinely safe. And I want. Her voice softens. I want to try. He crosses the kitchen and holds her face in his hands. You don't need to give me a child, he says. You already gave me a life. She puts her hands over his. I know, she says. That's why I want to. The labor was tense. Jae-min had delivered hundreds of babies. He had performed emergency obstetric surgery in conditions that would have made other surgeons walk out. He had been the calmest person in rooms where calm was the difference between living and dying. He spent this labor in the hallway outside the delivery room. He sat in a chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, and he did not move for 3 hours. A nurse offered him coffee, and he didn't hear her the first time. He had no file to review, no procedure to anchor himself to. He was just a man in a hallway, and his whole world was behind a door, and there was nothing in his very particular set of skills that could help. The door opened. A nurse appeared, with an expression that told him everything before she said a word. Dr. Jae-min, everyone is well. He stood up. He didn't speak. He followed her through the door. Ingrid was exhausted in the way of someone who has just done something monumental and knows it. She looked at him when he walked in, and her face did something complicated and honest, and he crossed the room and sat beside her and took her hand, and they looked at each other without speaking for a moment, and everything that needed to be said was said in that. The nurse placed the baby in his arms. He looked down. The weight of a newborn is specific. He had felt it hundreds of times, and he had always felt it with professional care, the clinical calibration of someone assessing and protecting. He felt it now as something else entirely. Something that went through the professional and the careful and the controlled and landed somewhere underneath all of that. Somewhere he'd spent a long time keeping locked. He thought about a night 5 years ago, a woman on a gurney, a phone call from a man who said it wasn't his problem, a whisper before she went under, that he had never quite put down. Please save my baby. And himself standing over her, with his hands and his skill, and everything he had, fighting for a life that had against every odd fought back. He looked at his daughter. He thought about everything she had survived to be here, everything Ingrid had survived, all the grief and the silence, and the long way around maternity wards, and break-room confessions, and courtyard midnights. The whole impossible distance from that night to this one. You survived everything, he said quietly. It wasn't quite directed at the baby, and wasn't quite directed at Ingrid, and was somehow meant for both of them, and for a memory, and a moment happening at the same time. And you still found love. Ingrid watched him hold their daughter. She was too tired to keep her face composed, and didn't try. We should go outside later, she said. He looked up at her. The courtyard. The courtyard. They went in the early evening, when she was strong enough to walk. Jaemin carried the baby. The courtyard was the same as it had always been. Same bench, same city hum beyond the walls. The same light that fell at the same angle it always had. The place where he had first sat beside her without asking questions. Where she had found him after Derek left and told him she was done pretending. Where two people who had been made of scar tissue had slowly, carefully, inexpertly, learned to be made of something else instead. Ingrid sat down on the bench. Jaemin sat beside her. He passed her the baby, and she held their daughter and looked at the courtyard for a long moment. This is where it started, she said. Yes. We were so scared. Terrified, he agreed. Which was the most he'd ever admitted to that, and she noticed. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Their daughter made a small sound and settled, and somewhere above them, the hospital windows were lit against the darkening sky, and the city moved the way it always did, indifferent and continuous and full. Worth it? She asked. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his wife. He thought about a man who once stood in a corridor holding a dead phone, stunned in a way 5 years of surgery had never made him, and started walking back toward a woman he didn't know yet. Yes, he said. She leaned into him. He put his arm around her. The three of them stayed in the courtyard until the stars came out, in the same place where tragedy had begun, in the same place where, without either of them planning it, their life had quietly and completely started. And that's it, lovelies. Jaemin and Ingrid, two broken people who found each other in the same building where they both lost everything and somehow made it home. If this story hit you somewhere you weren't expecting, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next one.